Hey everyone, Ben Cooper Radio, part 2 of episode 295. I know, crazy, this whole splitting up a show thing. Well, I am back with Ben and Steve. It is the second episode where we're going to be talking a lot more about triathlon on a geeky level, about equipment and races and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into this podcast with British Triathlon and Accenture. So we are back, episode 2. I am joined by Steve and Ben. Hello again.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Awesome. So in the last episode, we discussed a lot about well-being, training, setting a baseline so we can move forward in a very positive way with whatever it is we're trying to achieve, whether it's triathlon or it's something else. Now, one question I actually missed off from episode 1 on the kind of theme of training and nutrition. Sometimes people ask me, Ben, what do I need to focus on? Is it training that's most important? Is it the nutrition that's most important? Because you see this meme go around the internet all the time. It's 70% nutrition, it's 30% training. For people that are confused of where their focus needs to be, how would you frame that? What advice would you give people to focus their energy on what needs to be done to be wherever it is they're trying to get to?
I think for us, training is king, but what allows, at the elite level, with the guys that we're working with, but nutrition complements that, or not, doesn't actually, complements the wrong word. Nutrition is critical to them being able to complete the training, but then also, critically to get the gains from the training. So you couldn't say one's more important than the other, because they just couldn't do, if they didn't train, they wouldn't be any good. And if they didn't fuel properly, then they wouldn't be able to complete the training. So, I wouldn't be able to say it's 70-60 or 70-30 or 60-40, whatever. You just simply can't do one without the other. It's interesting. We spent quite a bit of time in Brazil the last few years with Rio, and different cultures, throw up different surprises. In Brazil, they were obsessed with supplements, and all they wanted to ask was, what supplements do you guys take? That must be the magic bullet for why you're so good. What protein powder? And actually, our guys use very, very little in the way of supplementation. It's we've got a very, very good nutritionist. And for her, it's all about what your if you call natural nutrition, just nutrition through eating good food, and so actually, like I say, our guys use very little in the way of supplementation, and our performances are obviously still very good. It's not like we're lacking anything because of that. But yeah, I think the nutrition question about what comes first, what's more important. Like I say, it's you just can't do one without the other. So
perfect answer. We will leave it there, because that's exactly what I wanted you to say. But I wanted people to know that this is, you're creating an ecosystem. An athlete is an ecosystem, and one feeds into the other. So starting to get onto the specific topic of triathlon. Now, I will be 100% honest, I do not do triathlon. So I'm kind of almost good to do this podcast, because I will come at this from kind of a newbie perspective. I'm a rugby player, so the way that I view my entry point into rugby is quite simple. I turn up to a rugby club, they throw me a ball, and we start to play. Now, when I look at triathlon, I actually feel that maybe it's not as accessible as something like rugby. Like, okay, there's a bike involved, there's a pool involved, there's running involved. How accessible do you feel triathlon is? Because again, a lot of people are looking at the elite level and they'll compare themselves to that. So package almost the entry level to triathlon training and competing.
So where there are barriers in some sports, there are different ones in others. So straight away, you could turn up at a rugby club and join in with a training session, but could you get a match? Perhaps the different way of looking at triathlon is, it might be quite a few barriers to overcome in terms of getting started in training and all the rest of it, but you can have a race, you can get involved in a triathlon race, whatever your level, and local race organisers are all over the country popping up events that are very, very easily accessible. In some cases, you can even borrow equipment to do the races as well.
Cool.
So you can, you could literally turn up, do some, whole day experiences where you can do a bit of training and then just have a go at a bit of a race as well. So you should look out for that. There's a program called Go Try.
Okay.
A national endeavour that encourages and helps people to literally go and have a go.
And is that the URL, GOTRI?
Yeah, so if you were to Google that, you'd stumble across quite quickly initiatives by British Triathlon, Triathlon England and the home nations that will create opportunities for you to, or go and find opportunities to get involved. As far as getting involved in the sport of your own initiative, getting along to your gym, if your gym has a swimming pool and has some indoor training equipment, whether that be exercise bikes or treadmills, you can go and find out for yourself whether you can do the first steps or first strokes of swimming a few lengths, pedaling on a exercise bike or a spin bike and running on a treadmill, and see whether you start to get the bug before you've necessarily spent loads and loads of money on equipment, which, health warning, you can do.
Yeah.
Triathlon.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned ingest £5,000 on a bike. That's throwaway money for some people.
But it shows you the passion that people have for triathlon, because people will spend weeks and weeks and weeks looking at their next bike purchase, looking at the gadgets they want, because they're looking for those marginal gains. So it shows you that triathlon is an inspiring sport. It can help people, really reach new levels of fitness they probably didn't, really realise. And I think one of the things I like about triathlon is you get outdoors. And I don't think there's enough fitness anymore that's outdoors, because gym culture has become very big, and that's a cool thing. But there's something incredibly nourishing and inspiring about being in the great outdoors on a bike or going for a run.
It's a massive part of the attraction of the sport for me. Growing up in New Zealand and then in Australia, being outdoors was massive, and just a big part of just enjoyment of what I was doing. It's really interesting coming to the UK and thinking triathlon's not really, you're thinking it through, it's not really a logical fit in many ways. You're thinking, well, it's understandable in Australia in particular. You've got the beach and you've got lots of really nice weather. But actually, I've got a stronger sort of passion for the sport since coming to the UK, because the connection with nature is, I think, in this country probably even stronger. And that I've learned a hell of a lot being around some of our elite athletes, in the way that for them, training is just it's so far away from a chore or a job. It's just the pure enjoyment of being in the outdoors. Now they train in all weathers, and some instances the muddier the better, and a bit of snow, a bit of whatever, swimming in a cold lake. That connection with nature, I think is on so many levels really, really important. And yeah, the gym, you can do stuff in the gym and there's gains to be made in the gym, but actually what I see with triathlon is that ability to go and explore nature is such a huge part of the attraction of the sport.
So, talking about competition, which was the previous question, paint a little picture for me. If someone's sitting there at home thinking, okay, so my first event is maybe local, it's maybe on the weekend, it'll maybe take me half a day. What kind of distances are we looking at entry level, and what distances are we looking at Olympic level?
So, if you're just exploring for the first time triathlon and you want to experience that, you can find events where the swim might be in a swimming pool and it might be 200 metres, 400 metres, followed by 10k, 15k bike ride and 3 or 4k run. And for young kids in particular, even shorter distances, just to make it accessible, make sure it can be done.
I think I could do that actually.
Yeah. You don't go in the kids event, they'll be pretty quick.
Yeah, but I'd win.
I wouldn't be so sure.
And then you start to progress into what we'd call perhaps the the formula distances. So a sprint distance triathlon, which coincidentally is the competitive distance for para-triathlon, is a 750 metre swim, a 20k bike and a 5k run. And then the so-called Olympic distance race, in triathlon federation terms, that's referred to as standard distance, is a 1500 metre swim, a 40k bike and a 10k run. And then there are all sorts of variations beyond that. And depending on weather conditions, race distances can be adjusted. So if the difference between the water temperature and the air temperature is too stark, if the water is cold and the air temperature is also very cold, then the swim might be curtailed or shortened.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the beauty of the sport, and I think that's one of the things that for that accessibility question, I think is the next big step, is how we make that as accessible as possible for everyone. And one of the other things with triathlon, you've got the 3 disciplines. There are a lot of races that you can enter in a team and do a relay event. So for quite a few people, it might be the swim that they're a bit unsure about, and whilst you're getting to that point where you're building up that confidence level, you could go and do an event with some friends, some colleagues at work, which means that you might do the bike leg or the run leg, and someone else does the swim leg.
That's cool.
There's also the variants of the sport with duathlon, which is running, cycling, and running.
Yep.
And then you've got aquathlon events. You've then also got events that are Xterra, which are mountain bike triathlons. So again, even more sort of getting into that nature side of things. There's a whole range of events and ways to access the sport, and I think that is another one of the areas that we can be better at, sort of getting that message out there that at the elite level it's pretty intense, but actually what it should be about for people just wanting to access is just coming together with some friends and actually enjoying doing something together and achieving together.
Well, after all, nothing beats working together, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think as an outsider, I would initially, elite level again, kind of look at triathlon as maybe a bit of a lonely sport, being in the pool or being on the bike. But, all of my friends that do endurance exercise, whether it's triathlon or not, they're meeting up together, they're going on the ride together at the weekend, they're quite often having lunch together afterwards. And actually, that's what a lot of people, for me, want from sport, and that's why I play sport. It's the social environment as well. It's just having people on your level to share stories and journeys with.
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned that, because one of the big appeals of triathlon for me personally, when I was participating and competing in triathlon, but I see it as well, is that social side of it. It really is a social sport. So one example of that is it's one of the sports, and I dare say there are others, but it is a USP of triathlon. You can go along to a race and find out that Alistair Brownlee is on the start list somewhere else, within the event that you're doing. There are lots of layers to the competition, a bit like a big London marathon or something like that. The difference being that you can be chatting to them in transition, or having a bit of a chat about your equipment with the superstars of the sport, and it really is that kind of atmosphere. It really does make a newcomer feel very, very welcome. And then the other element of it, whilst it's an individual endeavour, you get to go out and train with your buddies, and on that tough, windy, cold, wet ride, you all come back afterwards and have a bit of a laugh and a joke at how much you all suffered together.
Yep.
It's a strange culture, but it pulls people together like nothing else I've ever seen. And then, talking about the relays that Ben mentioned, you see all extremes. You see companies representing themselves in teams in relay events, but you also see families and several generations competing together in teams. It's really quite fantastic in that social aspect of the sport.
Yeah,
both in training and racing.
So you mentioned equipment in that in your answer there. We talked about competitions. We said, right, this is the distance that you start at, this is the distance you can work on. I can imagine getting into that kind of like middle point of competing, you need to start thinking maybe properly about equipment, like maybe the bike that you're using, the setup, the wetsuit. What does a kit list look like for that kind of middle to more advanced kind of rider, so people in their head can think, okay, this is my potential progression in the sport?
Well, kit lists can be incredibly long.
Maybe we should give you a budget.
Yeah,
you can only spend £1,000.
I'll touch on a few of the key things. I think if you're getting to that middle ground where you're probably going and doing open water swimming triathlon, then a wetsuit's going to be a critical part. Set of decent goggles. A tri-suit's a given. You can't race otherwise. To get indecent exposure. And then the bike is the bit of kit that everyone really focuses in on. I think what I'd say, wetsuit, bike, shoes are probably your three most important bits of equipment, and I'd say the same thing with all three of them, is that it's the fit, if you like, and the suitability to the individual. That's the critical thing. So it's that age-old one. You can easily spend upward of 10 grand on a bike. That's not unheard of. 10, 12 grand. You take two athletes of the same performance level and you give someone a 1,200 pound bike, and they have a professional bike fitting on it, and they actually sit on it comfortably and are set up properly, as opposed to someone on a 10, 12 grand bike for whom the frame is the wrong size. The 1,200 pound bike athlete will wipe the floor with the other guy or the other athlete. Almost similarly with training, any of that equipment, start off at a point where if you decide actually this is not right for me or whatever, then you can sell it on, but you've not really lost anything. The sad thing for me is when you see people go sort of right to that top end, right at the beginning, and then after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, hopefully it doesn't happen, but it can happen, is that they move on to something else, or they're not it's not not quite for them. That huge investment then is a sort of it can be quite a ball and chain sort of thing. So I definitely say with triathlon, the most important thing I think you can do is make that connection with the people in your local area, triathlon clubs. One of the really good resources is the British Triathlon website. Find a local club and speak to people around in your area who are in the know. They'll know which is the best bike shop to go to. They'll the ones that give the best service, who's the best bike fitter in your local area. And it's also that little community. Internet and social media is great, but actual face to face with people, you can't beat it. And every area around the country will have its own little triathlon community with a huge amount of knowledge just sitting right there. So you ask that question of, I'm at this level, what's the right next bit of equipment for me, what should I be doing next? There'll be someone in your community that's going to have been there, done that, and be able to answer that question for you.
Yeah. And thinking about the cost of the equipment as well, if you can get yourself involved in a local club, chances are you'll, especially if you're in the UK and if you're involved in a club training culture, you'll do a lot of your training in a swimming pool, but you might have a small event coming up that you can borrow a wetsuit, see how you get on with it. And there is a lot of turnover of second-hand equipment as well. One bit of sage advice on that front: if you invest in your wetsuit and your bike, whether it's 500 quid, 5 grand, 10 grand on a bike, look after it, because you can start throwing good money after bad, fixing bikes that gear systems have seized up, or bearings have gone, or so keep your equipment clean and in good working order, whether that's you doing it or the local bike shop, and hose your wetsuit down so that it hasn't got filth on it that starts to rot the neoprene or the lining or whatever else. It'll last you a lot longer, and you'll be able to sell it on if it deteriorates and it's in crappy condition. When you want to move on to that next bike, if you can sell your old one for a decent price, that'll help you out no end. But otherwise, yeah, I'd agree with Ben. I think you need a set of goggles. If you're going to race in the UK, you need a wetsuit.
Mm-hmm.
My first season was in Cyprus. I didn't wear a wetsuit all year.
Just your budgie smugglers.
Yeah, and it was that era. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Have you still got those budgie?
Well, if I did, I wouldn't be able to get in them.
Fellas, amazing advice. In terms of people making sure they go to all the right places after today, are there any links we want to highlight, URLs? We mentioned GoTry, which is a place we can look at competitions. I can imagine there's probably quite a lot of Facebook groups for this kind of stuff, reused, not second-hand kit that people can buy. Are there any places worth mentioning?
The best resource I'd say in the area for people who are wanting just that knowledge and starting out would be BritishTriathlon.org.
Okay.
And within that you're going to find the local links. There's a getting involved link on the website, and I'd follow that. You're going to make some connections through that, which then are going to open up other connections. And again, I think the big thing I'd say is look local, and try and engage with people in your local community, because again, there's going to be a wealth of knowledge there, and there's going to be that social support around you as well.
Yeah, I think everybody's familiar with using Google these days. I think as soon as you start to Google local facilities for open water swimming or triathlon clubs, you're going to quickly stumble across lots of resources. And like you say, Ben, there'll be a lot of these venues now will have Facebook pages. So, I've seen communities of people checking the Facebook page to see who's going open water swimming today, see how big the crowd is, see who's going. Because, training is an individual sport, but training in a group is what makes it enjoyable. So get into those little communities of Facebook and WhatsApp groups and all the rest of it once you find them, and keep up to date on opportunities.
Amazing.
Near you.
Right, that is the end of episode 2 of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, the links GoTry. Just whack that into Google, the BritishTriathlon.org website. Go and get yourself clued up. Don't go into this, without knowing what you're doing. Start off in the right way. Don't go full bore on the equipment. Know what your goals are. Join the local group. Do the groundwork. And just embrace the local environment of triathlon. If you're unsure about, going into a full event and having to do all 3 disciplines, you might look at something like a mixed team challenge or a duathlon, or you might even just start off with a running race and then add the cycling. Whatever it is, you start within your capacity, and ultimately make sure you enjoy it. That's it for episode 2. Join us on episode 3, where we're going to be talking about turning your body into the ultimate athlete. Stay tuned for episode 3. Hey, how good was that? I'll be honest, I don't have a massive amount of exposure or experience to the whole triathlon scene. So actually learning about it was quite fascinating for me too. Am I tempted to go and try it on a personal level? No, if I'm honest. I'm a rugby player through and through, so my thing is rugby, going out and running a bit, going to the gym, but I think it's an amazing sport. I can now see why a lot of rugby players actually retire and go into things like triathlon, cycling, running, a lot more low impact. You meet a lot of cool people. Anyway, enough from me. If you are new to the show, please check out Ben Coomber Radio as a whole. There's nearly 5 years of education on this podcast. I know, incredible. Otherwise, I am Ben Coomber all over the internet. Just want to thank again British Triathlon and Accenture for working with us on this podcast. I think it's been brilliant. Anyway, I'm going to go and I'll see you on part 3.